History often asks how a civilized nation, a beacon of culture and science in the heart of Europe, could allow itself to be led into the abyss by a man who seemed, on the surface, to be nothing more than a failed artist and a drifting vagabond. To understand the catastrophe that engulfed the world in the 20th century, we cannot simply look at the tyrant shouting from a podium. We must look at the broken boy, the homeless wanderer, and the soldier blinded by gas and hatred. The story begins not in Germany, but across the border in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, on April 20, 1889. There, in a modest inn, a child was born who would eventually be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions. But in those early days, he was simply a baby named Adolf, the son of Alois and Clara. The household was not a happy one. Alois Hitler was a civil servant, a customs official who was rigid, short-tempered, and frequently violent. He believed in absolute obedience and enforced it with the lash. Young Adolf feared his father, a fear that turned into a deep-seated resentment against authority figures, a psychological scar that would manifest strangely later in his life. His mother, Clara, was the opposite. Doting, gentle, and overprotective, perhaps trying to compensate for the father's brutality. When Alois died suddenly of a lung hemorrhage when Adolf was just a teenager, the boy did not weep for the loss of a father, but he felt a sudden, dangerous liberation. He was now the man of the house, free to pursue his dreams without the looming shadow of his father's disapproval. And his dream was art. With a heart full of hope and a portfolio of drawings, the young man moved to Vienna, the glittering capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was convinced he was a genius waiting to be discovered. He applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts, expecting to be welcomed with open arms. Instead, he faced a rejection that would shatter his world. The examiners told him he had no talent for painting, suggesting he try architecture instead, but he lacked the academic credentials for that. Crushed and humiliated, he couldn't bear to tell his dying mother the truth. He stayed in Vienna, drifting. When his mother finally succumbed to breast cancer, the last tether to his humanity seemed to snap. He was now alone in the world, without money, without family, and without purpose. The years that followed in Vienna were a descent into squalor. The future dictator of Germany spent his days in homeless shelters, sleeping on park benches, and eating in soup kitchens funded by charity. He wore a ragged, long coat, unshaven and dirty, trying to sell small postcard paintings of Vienna's landmarks to tourists just to buy bread. It was here, in the flop houses and the gutters of Vienna, that a toxicity began to brew in his mind. He observed the multicultural tapestry of the empire, Czechs, Hungarians, Slavs, and Jews, and he began to despise it. He listened to the demagogues on street corners preaching pan-German nationalism and anti-Semitism. He began to convince himself that his personal failures were not his fault, but the result of a corrupt society orchestrated by invisible enemies. He absorbed the conspiracy theories of the time like a sponge, twisting his own misery into a political worldview. In 1913, fleeing conscription into the Austrian army, he moved to Munich, Germany. He felt more at home there, believing in the superiority of the German Reich over the multi-ethnic Austrian Empire. But he was still a nobody, a drifter without direction. Then, in August 1914, the event occurred that would give his life meaning for the first time. The outbreak of World War I. While millions wept at the prospect of war, photographs from the time show a young Hitler in the crowd at Odeonsplatz in Munich, his face glowing with rapture. He enlisted immediately in the Bavarian army. The army gave him what he had never had: a uniform, a purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sanctioned outlet for violence. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, a dangerous job that required running messages between trenches through artillery barrages and machine gun fire. Unlike many soldiers who grew to hate the war, Hitler thrived in it. He found discipline and camaraderie. He was decorated for bravery, receiving the Iron Cross, First Class, a rare honor for a corporal. But in October 1918, near the end of the war, he was caught in a British mustard gas attack. Blinded and choking, he was evacuated to a military hospital in. It was there, lying in darkness with his eyes bandaged, that he heard the news that shattered his reality. Germany had surrendered. The Kaiser had abdicated. The war was lost. He could not comprehend it. The German army was still on French soil. The propaganda had told them they were winning. How could they have lost? In his delirium and grief, he, like many other soldiers, latched onto a poisonous lie, the stab in the back myth. They convinced themselves that the army hadn't been defeated on the battlefield but had been betrayed at home by communists, socialists, and Jews. When he regained his sight, he looked out at a Germany that was in chaos. The Treaty of Versailles stripped the nation of its territory, decimated its military, and imposed crushing economic reparations. The proud empire was now the Weimar Republic, weak and fracturing. Hitler returned to Munich, still employed by the army. But now his job was to spy on the many radical political groups sprouting up in the beer halls of the city. One night, he was sent to observe a tiny, insignificant group called the German Workers' Party. He sat in the back, bored, until a man stood up and suggested that Bavaria should separate from Germany. Hitler, enraged, stood up and unleashed a tirade so passionate and forceful that the other members stared in stunned silence. He didn't just have anger, he had a voice. The party leadership was impressed. They invited the spy to join them. He was member number 555, though the party started counting at 500 to make themselves look bigger. He quickly realized that this tiny party was his vehicle to power. He discovered he had a hypnotic talent for public speaking. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a fanatic. He started in the back of beer halls, speaking to 20 people, then 50, then hundreds. He learned to read the crowd, to whip them into a frenzy, to play on their fears and resentments. He railed against the Treaty of Versailles, against the November criminals who signed the surrender, and against the Jews. He renamed the party the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. He designed a flag, taking the red of socialism, the white of nationalism, and placing an ancient symbol in the center, the swastika, turning it into a mark of terror. By 1923, Germany was in the grip of hyperinflation. The economy had collapsed. Money was worthless. People used wheelbarrows of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Desperation was everywhere, and desperation is the soil in which extremism grows. Hitler believed the time was right for a revolution. Inspired by Mussolini's march on Rome, he plotted to seize control of Bavaria and then march on Berlin. On the night of November 8, 1923, he surrounded a large beer hall in Munich where government officials were meeting. He burst through the doors, fired a pistol into the ceiling, and screamed, "The National Revolution has begun!" But the Beer Hall Putsch, as it came to be known, was a disaster. The police were waiting for them the next morning. In a brief gun battle on the streets of Munich, 16 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed. Hitler, dislocated shoulder and all, fled the scene but was soon arrested. He was put on trial for treason. It should have been the end of his career. Instead, he turned the courtroom into a stage. The judges, sympathetic to his right-wing nationalism, allowed him to speak for hours. He became a national figure, painting himself not as a traitor, but as a patriot trying to save a dying nation. He was sentenced to a mere 5 years in a comfortable prison cell, of which he served less than 1. In Landsberg prison, treated more like a guest than an inmate, he wrote a book. Mein Kampf, My Struggle, was a rambling, hateful manifesto that laid out exactly what he intended to do: destroy France, expand German territory into Russia, and eliminate the Jewish race. At the time, few took it seriously. It was dismissed as the ravings of a failed revolutionary. When he was released in 1924, the economy had stabilized. The golden 20s had arrived. People had jobs again. The Nazi Party was banned, and Hitler was viewed as a relic of the chaotic past. He was ignored. For 4 years, he worked to rebuild the party, deciding that he would not take power by guns, but by votes. He would destroy democracy from the inside. He reorganized the party structure, created the SS as his personal bodyguard, and created the Hitler Youth to indoctrinate the next generation. Yet, in the 1928 elections, the Nazis won only 2.6% of the vote. They were a joke, a fringe group of radicals on the edge of political oblivion. Then, in October 1929, the American stock market crashed. The Great Depression sent shockwaves across the globe, but it hit Germany harder than anyone else. American loans that were propping up the German economy were recalled. Banks collapsed. Factories closed. Unemployment skyrocketed to 6 million. The misery returned, deeper and darker than before. The center parties had no answers. The people were starving and afraid. And when people are afraid, they look for a savior. Hitler was waiting. He began to fly across Germany by airplane, the first politician to do so, appearing in multiple cities in a single day. His message was simple and seductive. I can fix this. I will give you bread. I will give you work. I will restore Germany's honor. He didn't speak of policy details. He spoke of emotion. He offered a scapegoat for their suffering. The Nazi vote surged. In 1930, they became the second largest party. By July 1932, they were the largest party in the Reichstag. However, Hitler was not yet the leader of the country. President Paul von Hindenburg, the elderly war hero who held the presidency, despised Hitler. He called him the Bohemian Corporal and refused to appoint him chancellor. The political system entered a gridlock. Chancellors came and went, unable to form a stable government without the Nazis. Conservative politicians, led by Franz von Papen, thought they could use Hitler. They believed they could harness his popularity while controlling him from the background. They famously said, "In 2 months, we will have pushed Hitler into a corner so hard that he will squeak." It was a fatal miscalculation. They underestimated his ruthlessness. After months of backroom deals and political intrigue, Hindenburg was finally convinced that there was no other choice. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was summoned to the presidential palace. He emerged not as a prisoner, but as the Chancellor of Germany. That night, thousands of stormtroopers marched through the Brandenburg Gate carrying torches, a river of fire flowing through the heart of Berlin. The failed artist, the homeless drifter, the angry soldier, had ascended to the highest office in the land. The world watched, hoping that power would tame him, hoping that the responsibilities of office would moderate his radicalism. They were wrong. The darkness had not just arrived, it had taken the throne, and the world was about to burn.